So my manager talks to, 90% of my clients. We make that introduction to them. But when it comes right down to the nitty gritty, it's me.
Yeah.
It's taking the fall. It's me that's taking the hit if something goes wrong.
The verdict stunned the automotive world. Wayne Karini, the soft-spoken restorer whose television series Chasing Classic Cars had turned dusty garages into temples of nostalgia, is now serving a life sentence without parole. To many Americans, Carini was the reassuring voice of craftsmanship, a man who could coax beauty out of rust. The idea that he could also have been the face of an international laundering empire seemed impossible. News of his conviction broke like a thunderclap across collector circles. At dealerships, auctions, and private car clubs, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Social media feeds that once celebrated engine restorations filled overnight with disbelief and anger. How had the symbol of integrity for an entire industry become its greatest cautionary tale? Federal prosecutors called the case one of the most sophisticated laundering schemes ever conducted through the high-end car market. Their investigation revealed a labyrinth of shell companies, anonymous buyers, and untraceable transfers connecting Connecticut workshops to bank accounts in Singapore and Zurich. At the center of that web, they said, stood Wayne Karini, trusted broker, celebrity restorer, and alleged conduit for hundreds of millions of dollars in illicit capital. Whether Carini was a manipulator or merely manipulated remains a question that divides the community he once united. Yet one thing is undeniable. His downfall exposed how easily passion, prestige, and profit can intertwine until no one remembers where authenticity ends and corruption begins. The story of Wayne Karini is no longer about cars. It is about what happens when trust itself becomes a commodity. Long before courtrooms and controversy, Wayne Karini was a craftsman's son. In the small town of Portland, Connecticut, he learned restoration by watching his father hammer panels and blend paint until metal gleamed like liquid. Those quiet lessons shaped a meticulous temperament and a reverence for mechanical history. By his 20s, Carini could identify a pre-war engine by sound alone. He opened F40 Motorsports in the late 1980s, naming it after the Ferrari F40, a symbol of perfection in engineering. What began as a modest workshop soon attracted the attention of serious collectors. Celebrities such as David Letterman and tennis champion Ivan Lendl commissioned him to restore prized vehicles. Each project reinforced his reputation as a man who valued precision over publicity. That changed with television. In 2008, the Velocity Channel launched Chasing Classic Cars, a series following Carini as he hunted rare automobiles, negotiated purchases, and revived forgotten relics. The program transformed a niche hobby into mainstream entertainment. Viewers were captivated by his calm explanations and the unpretentious joy he found in reviving old machines. Ratings soared, and the show ran for more than a decade. The exposure elevated both Carini and the classic car market. Prices surged, international investors flooded in, and the notion of cars as alternative assets took hold. F40 Motorsports expanded into a multifaceted enterprise offering restoration, brokerage, and auction representation. Carini himself became an ambassador for the hobby, presiding as judge at elite concours events and appearing in charity drives for autism awareness. By 2019, he was more than a restorer. He was an institution. His company's valuation influenced auction trends, and his televised appraisals could add six figures to a car's price overnight. Yet with influence came vulnerability. As F40 Motorsports handled larger sums, the boundary between enthusiast culture and high finance began to blur. The same trust that had built his career would later leave him exposed to forces far beyond his control. The boom in vintage automobiles coincided with a surge of global wealth seeking discreet havens. Fine art, diamonds, and classic cars became preferred vehicles for capital that preferred not to attract attention. Cars offered a unique advantage. Their value could be subjective, their movement across borders routine, and their ownership easily concealed through intermediaries. F40. Motorsports found itself ideally positioned within this new ecosystem. Its sterling reputation, international clientele, and history of high-value transactions made it a natural bridge between sellers and buyers who wished to remain invisible. Wayne Karini's network expanded rapidly during the 2010s. He brokered deals for Middle Eastern royals, Russian investors, and Asian magnates, many represented by shell corporations. At first, the growth appeared legitimate, but beneath the glossy surface, patterns emerged that troubled auditors. Vehicles resold several times in months, titles registered under temporary firms, payments split across multiple jurisdictions. Some transfers bypassed official auction channels entirely, handled through private exhibitions, where contracts were signed behind closed doors. Former employees would later testify that concerns were raised internally. Provenance documents arrived incomplete. Inspection reports were requested but never returned. Carini, accustomed to a handshake culture, insisted on discretion to protect clients' privacy. In hindsight, that courtesy created the perfect shield for manipulation. By 2017, investigators estimate that more than $300 million had flowed through accounts linked to F40 Motorsports and its partners. Each transaction looked routine in isolation. Together they formed a mosaic of deliberate obscurity. The very success that had made Wayne Karini a household name had also turned his company into an unwitting hub for financial concealment on a global scale. The unraveling began with a single Ferrari. Valued at over $10 million, the 250 GT Lusso had passed through 4 owners in less than a month. Each sale appeared to be genuine, until Italian authorities noticed discrepancies in export paperwork. When the information reached U.S. regulators, they opened a preliminary review. What they discovered led to an international probe involving the FBI and Interpol. As agents reconstructed the car's trail, from a Milan showroom to a London holding company, onward to a Singapore dealer, and finally to Connecticut, they encountered a maze of offshore entities tied to the same intermediaries. Every link pointed back, directly or indirectly, to contracts signed under F40 Motorsports Brokerage Authority. At first, Carini dismissed the inquiry as bureaucratic overreach. He had, after all, handled hundreds of cross-border transactions without issue. But within months, subpoenas multiplied. Bank accounts were frozen, and longtime associates began receiving summonses. The more investigators dug, the more anomalies surfaced. Duplicate VINs, inflated valuations, and payments routed through tax havens. By 2023, the evidence had reached critical mass. Federal agents raided F40's Connecticut facility, seizing records, hard drives, and over 200 restoration files. What they found transformed suspicion into indictment. Wire transfer logs revealed consistent use of layered transactions designed to obscure origins of funds. While none bore Carini's signature, prosecutors argued the pattern was impossible without his awareness. The man who had once prided himself on transparency was now accused of presiding over one of the most opaque operations in collector history. The shine had worn off the chrome. Beneath it lay a corroded empire waiting to collapse. The trial of Wayne Karini began under a media spotlight more intense than anything the American collector car world had ever seen. For months leading up to the first hearing, reporters camped outside the Hartford Federal Courthouse while satellite trucks from every major network lined the streets. Inside, the courtroom became a theater of contradictions. A man once celebrated for reviving automotive history was now accused of corrupting it. Prosecutors opened with a sweeping narrative. They alleged that Carini had knowingly enabled an international laundering network by facilitating transactions that disguised illegal profits as legitimate investments in collectible vehicles. According to the indictment, F40 Motorsports had become a financial laundromat on wheels, transferring over $300 million through classic car deals routed across offshore accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. Cars, they said, were the perfect cover: valuable, portable, and difficult to trace. The government's lead attorney presented a meticulously organized case. Each chart projected on the courtroom screen traced a chain of transactions linking shell companies to car sales, then to foreign bank accounts. One sequence, involving a Ferrari 250 GT Lusso, captured the jury's attention. The same car had been sold 4 times in 30 days, each time through a different intermediary. Every rotation cleaned another layer of money, the prosecutor explained. Every sale made dirty funds appear legitimate. But the defense countered with a portrait of a man trapped in his own success. They described Wayne Karini as a craftsman, not a financier, a restorer who operated in good faith, deceived by sophisticated clients who manipulated his reputation for credibility. Defense counsel argued that he had built F40 Motorsports on trust, not greed, and that he had no knowledge of the underlying financial structures behind the sales. They produced emails showing Carini personally rejecting questionable offers and demanding verification of provenance when others urged him to cut corners. He was guilty only of believing too much in people, his lawyer told the court. Throughout the proceedings, Carini remained calm and expressionless, seated between his attorneys, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather-bound notebook. Observers described him as stoic, neither defiant nor broken, simply resolved. His family sat quietly in the gallery, enduring the relentless scrutiny of cameras that had once adored him. Witness after witness took the stand. Former employees testified to the increasing pressure from international clients and the confusion caused by the sheer volume of transactions. Forensic accountants dissected payment trails that snaked through holding companies in Luxembourg and Hong Kong. One expert described the web as a masterpiece of plausible deniability. When asked if Carini could have understood the full complexity of the system, she paused before answering. He may not have built it, but he certainly drove it. The emotional climax came during closing arguments. The prosecution framed the case not as a technical crime, but as a moral failure. Mr. Carini was not an unwitting pawn, the attorney declared. He was the gatekeeper. And when a gatekeeper looks away, the whole world behind that gate becomes fair game for corruption. The defense, in turn, pleaded for perspective. You cannot sentence a man for the sins of an industry he tried to elevate. After 12 weeks of testimony and 40 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts, aiding and abetting money laundering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and obstruction of financial reporting laws. The judge, citing the scale of the crime and its impact on international markets, sentenced Carini to life imprisonment without parole. As the ruling was read, the courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. Carini neither flinched nor spoke. Outside, protesters and supporters clashed, some calling for justice, others demanding mercy. For the automotive community, it was a day of reckoning, the moment when the man who had once personified integrity became the symbol of its loss. In that instant, the world of vintage cars ceased to be a haven of nostalgia. It became a case study in how even beauty, under the weight of money, can become a vehicle for deceit. The trial of Wayne Karini marked not only the end of his freedom, but the end of an era, a reminder that in industries built on passion, trust can be both the engine and the undoing. After the verdict, Wayne Karini vanished from public life as abruptly as he had once entered it. In the months that followed his sentencing, the man who had spent decades speaking passionately about engines and restoration refused to utter a single word to the outside world. No press statements, no appeals, no televised interviews. His silence was complete and deliberate. For the media, this quiet defiance only deepened the mystery. Reports from within the federal correctional system suggested that Carini lived a restrained and disciplined routine. He reportedly spent most of his days in the prison workshop, teaching mechanical maintenance to younger inmates. Those close to him described the gesture as symbolic, a master craftsman continuing to pass on his knowledge, even behind concrete walls. "He can't stop fixing things," one former inmate said. "That's just who he is." Yet beyond those modest acts of mentorship, Carini remained impenetrable. His attorney confirmed that he had refused every plea bargain, even those that might have reduced his sentence in exchange for cooperation. When investigators pressed him for information about the offshore clients and intermediaries who had vanished after his arrest, he simply shook his head. "If the price of keeping others safe is my name," he reportedly told his lawyer, "then so be it." The silence had consequences far beyond the cell block. Federal investigators admitted that their pursuit of other figures in the laundering network had stalled. With Carini as the only individual publicly convicted, many of the shadow financiers identified in early documents escaped scrutiny altogether. Within months of his imprisonment, several shell companies were quietly dissolved, and funds tied to suspicious accounts disappeared from tracing systems entirely. Meanwhile, the collector community fractured along moral lines. Some condemned Carini for obstructing justice, arguing that his refusal to cooperate protected powerful criminals and denied closure to honest dealers. Others romanticized his silence as an act of loyalty, a man choosing ruin over betrayal. This ideological divide ran through every major event in the industry, from trade conferences to auction houses. Outside prison, the toll on Carini's family was profound. His wife and daughters endured constant surveillance by reporters, online speculation, and the collapse of F40 Motorsports' reputation. The company was liquidated under federal oversight, and its archives, once a treasure trove of restoration history, were seized as evidence. Employees scattered, struggling to rebuild careers marked by suspicion. Still, letters from collectors around the world continued to arrive, addressed simply, Wayne Karini, Federal Correctional Institution, Tucson. Most went unanswered. Some contained photographs of restored cars, others handwritten notes of gratitude. Whatever else he had lost, Wayne Karini remained a symbol, a fallen craftsman whose silence spoke louder than any defense could have. The collapse of the Carini empire sent shockwaves through the global collector car market. What began as a criminal case soon transformed into a catalyst for sweeping reform. Regulators across the United States, United Kingdom, and European Union scrambled to impose stricter standards for provenance verification and financial transparency. Auctions that once operated on handshakes and private trust were now governed by compliance teams and anti-money laundering officers armed with forensic accountants and digital ledgers. Within months, new international directives required that any automobile valued above $250,000 must carry a fully traceable ownership history and a declared chain of custody verified by third-party auditors. Auction houses such as R.M. Sotheby's, Bonhams, and Barrett Jackson introduced client due diligence checks that mirrored those of global banks. Sellers were required to disclose beneficial ownership, and buyers had to provide documented funding sources. For an industry long driven by passion and discretion, it was a cultural revolution. The reforms met resistance at first. Many veteran collectors lamented the loss of privacy and the cumbersome bureaucracy. Transactions that once took days now stretched into weeks as documentation was verified and wire transfers scrutinized. But with time, transparency began to heal the wounds left by scandal. Market confidence, which had plunged after Carini's conviction, slowly stabilized. Prices adjusted to reflect real demand, rather than speculative inflation. For the first time in years, authenticity, rather than glamour, became the defining measure of value. Paradoxically, Wayne Carini's downfall became a moral reference point. Academics, journalists, and auction executives invoked his story as a turning point, a reminder that unchecked trust can turn an art form into a money laundering mechanism overnight. The Carini Clause, as it became informally known, entered compliance vocabulary to describe the strict verification protocols designed to prevent another scandal of similar scale. Meanwhile, former colleagues sought to preserve the positive aspects of his legacy. A group of restorers in Connecticut founded the Carini Trust for Automotive Ethics and Education, offering scholarships to students in mechanical restoration and museum studies. Their stated goal was to separate the craft from the corruption. At Concours events, judges frequently cited Carini's earlier commitment to mentorship, urging established collectors to open their garages to the next generation, rather than hoard expertise behind wealth and exclusivity. His family worked quietly to rebuild what remained. His eldest daughter, once seen occasionally on Chasing Classic Cars, opened a small restoration studio focused on community projects, repairing school buses, vintage farm trucks, and donation vehicles for charity auctions. She refused interviews about her father, but often quoted one of his lines, "You fix what's broken, no matter how long it takes." To many, it became both epitaph and instruction. For the broader industry, the Carini case exposed deeper truths. The passion for preservation had collided with the realities of global finance. Collectors, once content to treat their cars as symbols of taste and nostalgia, were forced to confront their role in an opaque economy that thrived on secrecy. What emerged from the ashes was an industry chastened but wiser, one that finally understood that heritage cannot survive without honesty. Years later, the market remains under constant oversight. Restoration firms now employ compliance officers. Even small dealers maintain digital ledgers for every sale. Though many lament the lost innocence of the golden years, few would trade the stability that followed. Wayne Karini's name, tarnished though it remains, became a permanent reminder of the cost of trust misplaced, and of an era that mistook passion for protection. Years after the sentencing, debate about Wayne Karini's true role continues. Some investigative journalists insist that he was the convenient face of a far larger network stretching into organized finance. Others maintain that the evidence against him was overwhelming and that his conviction restored integrity to a corrupted market. What remains indisputable is the paradox of his legacy. He elevated car restoration from hobby to heritage, inspired countless young mechanics, and globalized appreciation for classic design. Yet his name is now inseparable from the darkest chapter of that same world. In industry forums, discussions of compliance often begin with a single phrase, "Remember Carini." Former clients describe feeling both betrayed and sympathetic. "He gave the cars back their souls," one collector said, "and maybe lost his own in the process." Scholars analyzing the case point out that it reflects a broader truth. Whenever passion becomes capital, the line between devotion and exploitation blurs beyond recognition. Today, the old F40 Motorsports showroom stands empty, its sign removed, its walls stripped bare. Dust gathers where rare Ferraris once glistened under museum lighting. On a workbench remains a single brass plaque engraved with one of Wayne's favorite sayings, "You can figure it out. You just have to take your time." Perhaps he did figure it out, too late for himself, but just in time for an industry forced to confront its reflection. The story of Wayne Karini endures as both caution and tribute. Proof that even in a world built on polish and perfection, no surface is too bright to hide the cracks beneath.